Hi everyone! Today I wanted to talk about the long-term influence that is going to be with us from March through August of this year, and that is transiting Saturn and Aquarius is going to be squaring moon nodes that are currently in Taurus and in Scorpio. Even by itself, this kind of influence typically corresponds with major disasters, accidents, and major geopolitical events that shake things up sort of at the top of various organizations. However, this particular time in April, especially around April 4th and 5th, we will also have Mars, another malefic, joining Saturn. So both of them are going to be squaring the nodes. And at the same time, right around the 12th of April, we will have also, of course, the conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces that sometimes also corresponds with things like floods and big, basically, problems that related to water. And also, all at the same time, we will have Uranus, that is currently in Taurus, conjuncting one of the nodes and making a general square to Saturn. And then later on, actually, in the late July and in early August, right around August 1st, Uranus is actually going to be exactly conjunct with the North Node. And at that time, Mars, that is currently making a square to Uranus, is going to be then conjuncting Uranus as well. So basically this entire period from March through about early August is going to be definitely ripe for some sort of a major disaster, some sort of catastrophic event. And when I looked in the past, as far as in the previous years, what kind of events corresponded with similar transits, basically I found many instances or really major earthquakes, and I will put that down in the description. I also listed them in my blog at tolstunka.com with some excerpts from Wikipedia that basically describe all different events that I found, and specifically the earthquakes were really major. So some really major earthquakes in, say, Taiwan or in Turkey and in Italy that involved really like 7 point something or even higher. Really severe extreme earthquakes that resulted in major damages. Other types of events that currently occurred, often rather occurred, were aviation disasters, and in particular there were many, or I would say more than I would have expected to see, crashes that involved mid-air collisions. And in particular, when you think about Uranus, Uranus of course has to do with things that happen unexpectedly, but by itself, even Saturn conjunct Mars often brings problems and losses, and together they're conjuncting in Aquarius, that is ruled by Uranus, and the sign of Aquarius actually rules things like transportation by air, airspace, drones, network, electric vehicles, anything to do with like high-tech gadgets and electronics, etc. And when you think about Saturn, of course, this is a planet that has to do with things like ice, loss, constriction, moving slowly. And Mars has to do with things that are hot, fiery, explosive, and it's an engine that wants to move really, really fast. So when you combine the energy of basically Saturn, ice, with Mars, fire, heat, you get something that's trying to move really slowly, but that is somehow unable to do so. This could be because there's an obstacle, so perhaps it's a fast-moving vehicle or an airplane that meets a sudden, maybe like it's a mountain or something that basically comes to an abrupt stop. Or it could be that an airplane is overweight and it's trying to gain altitude, but it can't because, again, Saturn makes things heavy, slow, or there's an old part that breaks down, or something just basically goes haywire and doesn't function because, again, there's a breakdown, or the part is worn out, or again things are just too slow and this vehicle or engine just can't move fast enough. So unfortunately with this kind of influence, there definitely is a possibility of, like I said, a major airplane crash, a major earthquake, and again something that is unfortunately more damaging than usual. That's because whenever we see slow planets transiting and making difficult transits to the moon nodes, typically you have an event that involves large groups of people, is meaningful to large groups of people, and by that I mean like large organizations, countries, large sort of land masses that are impacted. And of course, at the same time, as I mentioned, on the 12th of April, we will have a Neptune conjunction Jupiter in Pisces, which by itself, without even any other transits, typically would coincide with something like an excess of water, increase, prices, and anything to do with like beverages, chemicals, fertilizers, and seafood, etc. And of course, that's exactly what we're seeing in the markets. But in terms of the actual events, we will see just sort of a wave of, like a Neptune is a wave of, and of course, Jupiter is a large wave. So we have like a large wave of immigrants, which, if there's a catastrophe, of course, like what we see right now in Ukraine, many people, of course, are fleeing. But unfortunately, with these difficult transits from March to August, there may even be an escalation of events somewhere in the world, or it could be another catastrophe where people literally have to flee. Or it could be a large wave of literally water. So if there's an earthquake, it may occur somewhere near a seaside location. So there may be a tsunami following that earthquake, or an earthquake could be like on an island or again near a beach somewhere. At the same time, also, typically Saturnian kind of problems or events that involve Saturn often have to do with some sort of structural damage. So something that's made out of rock or concrete, steel, etc. is then damaged, again, because it's an earthquake, there's an earthquake, or there's a collapse, some structural problems, maybe due to water erosion, or basically either there is just too much water and that is what undermines the structure and structure collapses, or it could be because of the earthquake or some shakeup. For example, a dam fails and therefore you have this wave of water. So for example, last summer when we had a T-square between, yet again, Mars, Saturn, and Uranus, we had this unfortunate or tragic, I should say, event where the condominium tower in Miami had collapsed. And again, structural collapse, something that is really heavy, falls from the top. So again, here we can have something to do with like a large structure. It could be, like I said, an airplane, or it could be a dam, or it could be, again, something like a mudslide or rock slide in the mountains, something that's really heavy and basically comes down from a really large height. But this time we will also have this additional influence of Jupiter and Neptune and Pisces, which make things larger, and it may involve, again, water, chemicals, affect things through maybe spilling some chemical into the water, or basically damaging things through pollution, or again, it could be a water erosion that causes this event. Another, of course, thought I had was that if you have an airplane, for example, that's trying to take off, it still has a lot of fuel in it, and therefore you would have, obviously, if something basically is unable to take off, it still has all that gas, fuel, or whatever it has that can explode. And of course, Jupiter conjunct Neptune and Pisces is also a significator of some major oil leak, major gas leak, followed potentially by an explosion, obviously, if it, under certain circumstances, or it could be maybe a problem like an industrial disaster at a plant, again, likely a large plant, with these kind of transits, including nodes and including Jupiter, usually makes things extra large. And basically, so if you have maybe a mistake where maybe somebody's mixing the wrong chemicals, or there's a leak of a chemical, then things again can explode, and that can also lead to a large, basically structural damage and environmental damage. So those are the types of events that we can potentially look at. Other types of events that I've seen in the past were something to do with like maybe a large oil pipe leak. There was also this Ocean Ranger disaster where basically a large oil rig near Canada had sunk, and at that time there was also Pluto sort of nearby the nodes, maybe within like 5 degrees, it's not quite precisely involved, but sort of nearby, so perhaps that also contributed, or rather for sure that definitely also contributed. This time we don't have Pluto near the nodes, or Saturn, or Uranus, thankfully, because that would probably would make things even more tragic. But we do have this Jupiter and Neptune, so in addition to there being a possibility of some structural damage, as I said, there may be also an associated problem. This has to do with, again, water contamination, release of large wave of, again, gas, water, oil, that could be a large explosion of some sort that, again, involves some chemicals. Or it could be a situation where maybe there's a ferry that's overloaded and it sinks, or a situation that involves, again, some naval, I don't know, ships or submarine or fishing boats, where again some problem occurs, again due to either bad weather, tsunami, etc., and maybe they run into, I don't know, some building and cause structural damage. So all of those things can be combined, unfortunately, under these transits. And the last set of events that I've seen, again, previously under similar transits, is there were a lot of either coup d'etats or attempted coup d'etats, like in 1996, I believe there was one in Turkey, and there's some other ones that, again, I've listed in the description here. And basically, that, again, as just mentioned, Saturn also has to do with things like large corporations, governmental organizations, and people sort of at the top chain of command. So we basically may also see some problems on the geopolitical level where perhaps some leaders will be in some stressful situations, or there's some challenging circumstances for, large corporations where there's some restructuring or some attempt basically of changing things up that is disruptive, again, for large groups of people. And in particular, what is worth mentioning, and of course I can't look at every chart for every country, but I have been looking, keeping track of in the US chart in particular, and so this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is actually going to be occurring on the midheaven in the US chart. And of course midheaven has to do with things like leaders, be it actual leaders of the country or leadership of that country on the world arena. And of course the positive influence of Jupiter conjunct Neptune and Pisces would be a leadership that is sort of a spiritual kind, or somebody who's wise and spiritual and religious, or has really inspirational message for others. Or of course the negative manifestation would be confusion. Neptune also has to do with like fog, confusion, miscommunication. So there's also potential for basically there being some problem, and maybe not intentional, because again, with Jupiter and Neptune together, the intentions, I think, are actually very noble and very, even spiritual and inspiring. But there is definitely a possibility of there being some miscommunication or misinformation, or just somebody not seeing things clearly or seeing what they want to see. Again, that's sort of Neptune for you, because it also, on the negative vibration of Neptune, is things like drugs, illusions, even mental illnesses, where people just kind of are in their own state when they don't see things clearly. So I don't know what the manifestation is going to be, but certainly the emphasis, again, on the US chart at that time will be on leadership. Again, it could be leadership in the world or making inspiring message. And it could be, of course, with Neptune, it also symbolizes things like movies, also music, arts. And so we may also see something that's maybe coming out of not necessarily government, but it could be an inspirational message that's coming from like an art industry, or from movie industry, etc. So it could be something that's involving leaders that are not necessarily in government, but could be just representatives of, again, like musicians or something like that, somebody famous like that. So that's for the US. And one thing to note, that also between the 17th and the 20th of April, there's another interesting transit that actually we'll see in heliocentric chart. So rather than looking at it from the perspective of being on Earth, if we kind of look at it in a higher level, we will see that Pluto and Mars are going to be conjunct, and together they will be squaring in the heliocentric chart the position of Earth and Moon. And so that, of course, is also a difficult transit in itself, and it does also indicate at that time, again, that's 17th through the 20th of April, where there may be some problems that are associated with something either secretive or some manipulation or something that happens underground. So if there's like a stored, decaying, some sort of what is the byproduct of some industrial, output that is, maybe it comes through the surface through an earthquake, for example, and contaminates the environment. Or it could be some manipulative actions that now come out, or some manipulative and or secretive actions that are not necessarily done legally or done in some dangerous way. They may again come out and be make some damage or do some damage. At the same time, of course, Pluto has to do with things like mines, as in mining for metals or minerals, and also has to do with locations that again have to do like underground storage, deep below the surface, and also things that are related to nuclear, like power plants, for example, nuclear weapons, anything that's like dangerous and has possibility of making this long-term kind of powerful damage. Or it could be again power that has to do with somebody just being in power and being a powerful leader that comes and kind of makes things changes things in a really significant way. And of course, but unfortunately, typically Pluto conjunction to Mars typically brings transformations that are at least first they're painful, or it could be even through an accident, which unfortunately under these other circumstances, with again Saturn specifically squaring the nodes, and Uranus and North Node approaching, definitely this is another time frame yet again in April where things may kind of go sort of down and something negative may occur. And so definitely I would say April may not be the best time for traveling, and certainly a good time, for doing something spiritual and maybe trying to stay inspired by doing things that you feel again are inspiring to you and to others. And that's that power of the Jupiter conjunct Neptune, that indeed there is a strong probability of coming up with some really beautiful art that can indeed inspire and transform others. But this should be really ideally the focus, and for sort of the safety reasons I would advise not traveling, especially around 4th and 5th of April, and really starting from the 31st of March and then the 12th plus minus couple days, and 17th through the 20th. And after that I would say late July and early August, and that's when we will have the exact conjunction between Uranus, Mars, and North Node, which typically again would coincide with yet another some sort of difficult situation, like another catastrophe, crash or industrial accident, an attempted coup or something along those lines. And again, at that time Jupiter will no longer be transiting together with Neptune. However, again, we will still have this possibility for like an accident, and Saturn is going to continue to square the nodes in August as well. So that's sort of the upcoming situation, that also maybe a time where perhaps it's not a good idea to travel. And definitely look at your own chart to see whether or not these specific transits affect you, because of course not everybody will be affected, not every country is going to experience an earthquake every day, but in areas that are prone to earthquakes, that is definitely the time of a heightened probability. And I did put out a video on the Rahu or the North Node, Uranus and Mars conjunction. So that is going to be occurring in late July, early August, and you can check that out separately. And in the future, we'll also make some more videos regarding the upcoming more precise Uranus and Saturn square that is still coming up in October, early November, and that will be another interesting / difficult time, but we will talk about it in a separate video. Until then, I hope this was helpful, and so I'll catch you guys next time. Until then, bye.